WSAV News 3 on your side, your local election headquarters, presents Meet the Candidates.
Welcome to WSAV's Meet the Candidates. I'm John Dowding. With only a few days until Election Day, we're hearing from our candidates for United States Senate, Georgia Senator David Perdue and his Democratic challenger, Jon Ossoff. The conversation starts with a discussion on health care and COVID-19.
Because something like 18% of Georgians right now have no health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. It's a problem that the Affordable Care Act limited options. It caused the cost to go up, and so we're working on that right now. In fact, there's a court case in front of the Supreme Court, and if that court rules that it was unconstitutional, we've got some bills. I co-sponsored a bill in the Senate that would actually protect pre-existing conditions. We've got other bills that will work on and protect and eliminate out of network billing, surprise billing, and then pharmaceutical costs is something we've really got to work on. And that's as much a trade issue as anything else. Foreign governments who have national health services don't pay for research and development when they buy U.S. drugs, and we can fix that. Even if the ACA is a reality, there are things that we can do to make this better. First of all, we've got to lower the cost. That's the problem. We've wasted a decade talking about insurance and not really talked about the drivers of cost. So we know that there are three diseases, Alzheimer's, cancer, and diabetes, that cause most of the cost in later life patients. And we know that this COVID-19 crisis has thrown everything amok, right? I mean, we're learning so much about this virus, but it just points out that we've got to get the healthcare system in this country fixed. It's not anywhere it needs to be, and if we can do it very quickly, we don't have to have a government takeover, and the last thing we need is socialized medicine. We would have 180 million people lose their private health insurance through their employer if we do what the Democrats want us to do.
Our health is on the ballot, and I mean by that, first of all, we need leaders who, in a public health emergency, such as this one, will empower medical experts and public health experts to lead the response, making health insurance and health care a reassuring, affordable reality for every family. That's our goal, and it's so achievable. The reason we haven't achieved it is the power of the insurance and drug companies who continue to price gouge, who continue to make it more difficult to access care, and politicians who do their bidding, like my opponent, David Perdue, who's still in the middle of this pandemic, is pushing to repeal those protections for pre-existing conditions. I will fight to crack down on price gouging by insurance and drug companies to make insurance and medicine affordable. I will deliver federal resources to strengthen and sustain our rural hospitals, 9 of which have closed in the last 10 years. To build new health clinics near our public schools so that every family can conveniently afford and access care. To add a public option, a nonprofit public option to the ACA exchange as an optional, affordable alternative for folks who want it. And to hold insurance companies accountable for surprise medical billing, for denial of claims, for the terrible service that they so often provide. You know, it feels like at moments when Georgia families most need help, what we get from the insurance companies is the stiff arm. They try to find ways to nickel and dime us in moments of crisis, and they should be held accountable for it.
You know, we've seen a number of varying responses on the federal, state, and local level to this pandemic. And, you know, I want to just start off by asking you, how would you grade the responses on each individual level?
There's a lot of variation at the state and local level and across the country, and a lot of local officials who have been doing their best in difficult circumstances. The bottom line is that the federal response deserves an F grade. And it's clear to everybody that the Trump administration has totally failed in the response to this pandemic. The president was in denial. Senator Perdue was in denial. It's actually worse than that. They knew the true scope of the threat. They were briefed in Washington repeatedly on the true scope of the threat. They didn't want us to know. They lied to us. Senator Perdue was getting briefings in Washington while he was telling us this disease was no deadlier than the ordinary flu. He knew better. He was just repeating President Trump's nonsense. And the Trump administration politicized the response. They marginalized their own public health experts. They sent mixed messages about, for example, how to protect ourselves and our families, whether it's hygienic practices or mask wearing. This has been a disaster. And nearly 250,000 Americans have been killed in 7 months. David Perdue told us the risk to our health was low. David Perdue told us the impact on economic growth would be little. You don't get to fail this badly on something of such consequence, with such immense human tragedy and human suffering, and then argue that you're qualified for re-election. They have to be defeated. They've let us down and people have died. Well, I'd like to see Brian Kemp listen to the advice of medical experts. Again, this is not rocket science. This is about empowering the people who know what they're doing. Politicians need to recognize the limits of their own wisdom and their own knowledge, and let public health experts lead in a public health crisis. And I think that's what we've seen at the federal and at the state level, is arrogant politicians who think they know best, who are actually pursuing their own short-term political interest.
Well, first of all, let's address the state. I think the state's done a remarkable job within the guidelines of reopening the economy. We've gotten testing going much more aggressively. And so I think Georgia's done a fantastic job, and it shows in how our governor is rated right now in responding to the pandemic. We were one of the first states to have a hotspot right there in Phoebe Putney in Albany, Georgia, and we responded to that with mobilization from Emory, the state, the National Guard, all of the above. So Georgia really put everything else aside, partisan politics and everything, and went after this virus. On a federal level, I give the Trump administration really high marks because they moved quickly. No matter what the Democrats say, the Democrats early on complained when Trump shut down travel from Asia. Biden actually said he was xenophobic, that was racist. And then when he quarantined people who were coming back, Nancy Pelosi went to San Francisco and Chinatown and said, this is ridiculous, we're open for business. So they are now complaining we didn't do enough early. But here's the big news. Under President Trump's leadership, we brought $47 billion of aid to the state of Georgia. That's almost twice the size of the annual budget in the state of Georgia. About $7 billion to hospitals and healthcare professionals.
And when we come back, criminal justice reform. The candidates weigh in on the hot button topic, plus their plans on how to strengthen the pandemic-stricken economy. You're watching WSAV's Meet the Candidates. Welcome back. Protests after the deaths of African Americans by police have shined a light on criminal justice reform and race relations in the country. Most recently, a mentally disabled African American man in Philadelphia was shot and killed by police. I spoke with the candidates about how they want to address calls for police reform.
We urgently need criminal justice reform and strengthen civil rights laws. And let's just get down to brass tacks. We need political leaders who will speak openly, candidly, and directly about this. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution already guarantees equal protection under the law, but that is so far from the reality in America today, and everybody knows it. There is systemic race and class bias in our justice system. When a young Black man in Glenn County is shot dead in the street in broad daylight on camera, and police and prosecutors look the other way, that makes a mockery of equal protection under the law. That's why we need a new Civil Rights Act to secure equal justice and equal protection for every American, regardless of race, regardless of class, regardless of who they know. Look, my first exposure to public service was working for Congressman John Lewis, the civil rights hero, who became my mentor for 17 years. And he dedicated his career to fighting for equal justice and civil rights. And what a new Civil Rights Act must do is empower the Civil Rights Division to hold officers, departments, prosecutors, and judges accountable where there is racial profiling, where there is police brutality, where there's unequal justice on race or class lines here in Georgia or anywhere across the country. I absolutely do not support defunding the police. What I support is reforming policing in America to rebuild trust between communities and law enforcement. Police have been over-militarized. We're losing that community policing where citizens know and trust those who are sworn to protect and serve us. When police departments are principally equipped with the weapons and technology derived from the military, that gets in the way of trust between communities and law enforcement. And reforming policing also means establishing national standards for the use of force, especially the use of deadly force.
Well, first of all, that was a tragedy right here in my own hometown. I mean, that shooting was unnecessary. It's just a tragedy. There's no other way to characterize it. And the other ones that involve the police and so forth are there, but this is not a reason at this point to defund the police. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the underlying causes of this, we've been working very diligently in the Trump administration, and I've been a part of these three bills. We passed criminal justice reform already. We had to reverse a Joe Biden bill that was written in 1994 that caught thousands of young black men in minimum sentencing, mandatory minimum sentencing. We reversed all that, and now there are thousands of young black men who have been let out of jail early because they should have never been caught up in these minimum sentences anyway. That took Donald Trump to do that. The second thing is opportunity zones. We brought 260 opportunity zones to the state of Georgia. This is going to be immensely important for drawing capital to these low economic challenged areas. And the other thing is we passed, David Scott, who's a Democrat in the House, I'm a Republican in the Senate, got together, and the two of us drove funding, permanent funding for historically black colleges and universities. Now, these are things the Democrats could have been doing and they did not do. Under Obama, under Clinton, it took us this time to get serious and get that done. I'm very proud of that because over the long term, that'll make a big difference. We've got a bill in there that would do several things. It would be take best practices and make that available to every community, more money for training of police officers, and then recruiting. We want police forces to reflect the nature of the community that they serve. These are members of our community. These are people that protect us. And I give high marks to the people, men and women in uniform. And this is the thing, this is not the time to be talking about defunding them. It's to talk about how do we help them.
And the U.S. economy has been anything but consistent as the pandemic continues to impact small businesses. Small businesses specifically continue to struggle, with many making the difficult decision of closing, and thousands continue to file for unemployment. Now, before the pandemic, Senator Perdue says Georgians benefited greatly from the economy. According to his campaign website, the Port of Savannah received full federal funding 4 years in a row, and the port expansion project continues because of that funding. Over 7 million jobs were created in the Peach State, and median household incomes increased. I spoke to the candidates about their plans to help small businesses and how to get the economy back in shape.
Well, the first thing we did is we brought $15 billion to the state for about 178,000 small businesses, really small businesses. We saved 1.5 million jobs. We have bills that have been up there since July that would extend that PPP program for several $100 billion, and the Democrats do not want to vote on it. They have said no repeatedly. The reason is that they want a bailout for California, Illinois, and New York for their big retirement plans, and that's why they won't vote for extending the PPP. That's where we are right now. The Democrats are blocking it. They don't want anything to happen until the election, and this is a tragedy because I've spent a lot of time talking to these small businesses. As a business guy, I know that cash flow and liquidity are very important to survival, and that's what we're facing right now, and that's what we were able to avoid in the first few months of this thing.
Well, Congress should have passed additional relief for small businesses and working families months and months ago. And the fact that they haven't speaks to the level of corruption in Washington. You know, if Goldman Sachs stock had started plummeting, the Senate would have been back in session overnight to pass emergency relief for investment banks. But when it's the mom and pop shop on the corner mechanic, the beauty parlor, the local restaurant or cafe on the brink of insolvency, when it's the working parents who are around the dinner table trying to figure out how they can make the house payment and pay for health care that they need that month because one of them's been laid off during this crisis, the Senate stayed on vacation. They still haven't passed new economic relief. And we all know why. It's because ordinary people aren't their big money donors. That's why we need elected officials and political leaders who put ordinary people and small businesses ahead of those corporate interests who have hundreds of lobbyists in Washington and limitless money to spend on politics.
And we're only halfway through our discussion. Still to come, the candidates share their thoughts on climate change. Stay with us. WSAV's Meet the Candidates will be back after the break. Welcome back to WSAV's Meet the Candidates. People are recovering in areas along the Gulf Coast and in northern Georgia after Hurricane Zeta. Zeta was the 27th named storm and the 11th storm to make landfall in a busy hurricane season. As waters continue to get warmer because of climate change, many younger voters are calling for action. I asked the candidates how they would like to address the growing concerns.
The climate is changing. You know, we've seen it in my lifetime. I grew up on a farm, though, and nobody knows how to take care of the air, the water, and the land like somebody from the farm. And we're doing the things that we should be doing. What we don't want to do is destroy our economy with the things like the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal is $9 trillion a year. Put that in perspective, that's about $65,000 for every family in America. That's just nonsense. But only about 20% of it goes to climate change. The other 80% is going to the social programs that the Democrats are trying to espouse. And they're confusing people with that. This is something that's very important for the next generation. It's just like a farmer handing down his land to the next generation. That's how we should look at it.
What are your thoughts on the Green New Deal? And what needs to be done specifically here in Georgia to combat climate change?
I don't support the Green New Deal. What I support is a historic American infrastructure plan, which will include historic investments in clean energy, rural broadband, public health clinics, transit and transportation, research and development. We've needed a significant infrastructure program in this country for more than a decade. And now more than ever, with so many out of work and needing to jumpstart this economy, to reclaim America's place as the world's leader in innovation, and to make sure that our economic growth is environmentally sustainable. It's time for an ambitious infrastructure plan. And there is very broad bipartisan support for it among the people here in Georgia. We can really unify this country, reunite this country at a time when we need unity and healing and common purpose to pass a significant infrastructure plan.
Stay with us. WSAV's Meet the Candidates continues after the break. The passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg sparked controversy over President Trump's decision to fill the vacancy before Election Day. Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed earlier in the week to fill Ginsburg's seat. And with this new addition to the court, a question has been raised over whether Democrats would pack the court if they win the White House. Now, think of court packing as expansion. It's the idea of adding new justices to balance the leaning of the court. We spoke to Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff about where he stands on that issue.
I don't think it's wise to expand the Supreme Court just because you don't agree on policy with a justice who's been recently confirmed to it. What I think we need, and this is why the Senate is so important, because the Senate confirms federal judges, are judges who will uphold the rule of law impartially and defend the public interest and not pursue an ideological agenda. The Supreme Court is going to hear oral arguments on the Affordable Care Act just days after this election. That means that those protections for Georgia families with pre-existing conditions will be a matter before the court. And it is entirely possible that they will strike down those protections for Georgians with pre-existing conditions if the court pursues an ideological and partisan agenda instead of pursuing the public interest and impartially upholding the rule of law. That's why Senator Perdue, remember that 4 years ago, Senator Perdue was adamant, you can play the clips of his speeches on the floor of the US Senate, that there should never be a judicial confirmation in a presidential election year. As a matter of principle, he said it over and over again. Well, right now he's thrown those principles out the window like clockwork because he wants to get a judge on the court who will overturn the Affordable Care Act. And he wants to overturn the Affordable Care Act to let insurance companies who fund his campaigns deny health care to Georgians with pre-existing conditions.
We reached out to Senator Perdue's campaign to find out where he stands on the issue. In a statement to News 3, his campaign said in part, quote, Senator Perdue is very much against court packing and has actually co-sponsored a constitutional amendment to prevent expansion of the court. He voted to confirm Justice Barrett to the court on Monday. Now, thank you for watching WSAV's Meet the Candidates. I'm John Dowding. Stay with WSAV, your local election headquarters, for everything you need to know on air and online.